Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. Hi, and welcome to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm joined today with my husband and co-host, Mason Westbrook.
Not hot husband, not sexy husband. That's gone the way of the.
It's gone by the wayside. Huh? I don't want to be too predictable. I like living in a paradigm where I think I might be spontaneous, even though I know that we as human beings are very predictable. What's it been like to go back through and do some study, because I've given you some assignments. What's it been like for you to go back and study and see things from this different perspective?
I think for right now, it sucks.
I probably shouldn't laugh, but the look on your face when you said that was really funny. Sorry.
It sucks. So today, we've been preparing for the next podcast, I think, what will be the next one, talking about internal and external sources, something you've mentioned before in a podcast, but now we're going to go into it and really talk about it. And I've been trying to search for and find something relevant to today, that kind of demonstrates that external sourcing, like where we're kind of being manipulated into putting more emphasis on the external source. And that's been difficult. I haven't really been successful at that until today. And I was reading through a notebook that I made when I was still very faithful and just trying to understand and write stuff down that was helpful and inspirational. And there was a talk written down by Elder Holland, and I liked the talk enough, I didn't even put any quote from it. I just wrote down the talk and the year. So I went to that talk, and then I actually picked the wrong one from a different year and listened to that, which I also enjoyed. Elder Holland was always my favorite in a lot of ways because of just the way that he's able to kind of touch us emotionally.
Mine too. That's actually why I liked him so much, was because there was some emotion and some passion behind his words, which was really interesting.
Yeah, relevant topics, but also there's some emotion there. And then, of course, he kind of branches out and tells stories in a way that's different from the written word. And, he'll say, excuse me for taking a little bit of literary license here or whatever.
Right.
And I always appreciated that. So then after listening to that one, which I also love, that was the one initially about mental health and depression and things, and very good, very relevant. But then I listened to this next one. It's from October of 2013, and it's called The First Great Commandment. And he talks about what happened to the apostles after Jesus Christ was killed. And then even after seeing him after resurrection, Jesus leaves and basically says, hey, I'll see you in Galilee. And the apostles are like, well, what do we do now? And he says, I'm going fishing.
Right.
The way he tells the story, of course, is kind of funny, but he tells it mostly accurately as well. And then he gets to that time where Jesus is kind of almost interrogating Peter. Do you love me more than these? And Peter says, yes. And he says, then feed my sheep. And do you love me more than these? And Peter says, yes. Then feed my lambs. And do you love me? So 3 times he says this. And so then Elder Holland kind of takes some license in this. And what really struck me today was that at this point in time, Elder Holland becomes very emotional, talking about the message in his vision, the message of the church, right? This is the message that Jesus gives these apostles, but really in his mind, the message of the church. Well, one of the things that really struck me as I'm trying to find these external messages that can be manipulative, it's really... I come back to it sucks, because now I'm taking, in a way, one of the people that's kind of been a hero to me, and I'm breaking down some of the stuff that I don't necessarily think he's doing intentionally, but that I believe exists there.
Right.
And one of the things he says that we'll all go back to God at some point in time, and we're going to have an interview somewhat like what Jesus and Peter had. He's going to ask you, did you love me? And then he's going to say a whole bunch of things. Well, at the end of this paragraph, he says, he, talking about the Lord, may remind us that the crowning characteristic of love is always loyalty.
When you told me that earlier, I was like, no.
I don't see that. right?
Okay.
I don't see that. And a couple of things that came up to me while you were kind of taking care of stuff, I wrote down some notes so I'd remember a few things. But one of the things that comes to me is if you equate love with loyalty, that provides for abusive relationships, right? A woman
Yeah.
stays with her abusive husband, or a man stays with his abusive wife because he loves them. And I got to stick it out. I got to get through this. This is a celestial marriage, right? We got married in the temple. We got to stick this out, got to stick through this. And this abused spouse puts up with way more than they ever needed to in the hopes that they can make this work. And I'm a hopeful person. Sometimes maybe that does work out, but there's countless of examples of where that doesn't work. It allows for domination. One of the things that is said here is, if you love me, so John 14:15, if you love me, keep my commandments. In other words, it's all about doing what I say. And I'm struggling with that message. The love equals loyalty. I'm really struggling with that message because it feels like almost that narcissistic thing that we talked about a little bit earlier too, just that for God, and I don't know that this is true, I'm just kind of sharing my feelings about these messages, but it feels like God is all about getting our attention, all about getting our love and doing exactly what he wants for us. Now, I can see that. If as a parent, you're like, look, I understand what's coming down the road. If it's in your best interest to do this, this, and this.
Right.
But not basing, not basing our love and our attention on whether or not you do those things.
Right.
And that's kind of how it feels right now, is that God is kind of basing some of his love and attention on whether or not we live up to what he, quote unquote, wants from us.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that's really interesting that you're talking about here is that you say, Holland claims that what is it, crowning what?
The crowning characteristic of love.
Crowning characteristic of love is loyalty.
Always loyalty.
Always loyalty, right. Well, and anytime you use an all-inclusive word, my gut churns unless I'm using it, in which case I hope somebody else's gut churns and calls me out on it. But
right.
No, I think, So even if we take away
there's one more piece I want to share too, but after you talk about what you're saying.
But I mean, what I hear you kind of complaining about is that it's loyalty translates into obedience. And then the crowning characteristic of love is obedience.
Right.
And that's also not...
That is the implied
it
message
falls
here.
Short. It really falls short. So I have a follow-up question, Mason, but why don't you give me your second part that you were talking about?
So don't forget that follow-up question.
Oh, I will. And then I'll come up with something better and it'll be fine. And then in the middle of the night, I'll be like, oh, that's what I wanted to ask him. And I'll write it down. And then in 3 weeks, I'll get to it and be like, I don't remember.
Don't wake me up in the middle of the night. Okay.
Okay, I won't.
All right. So then Elder Holland goes on and he says some other things that are kind of interesting, but he goes to this part that I want to focus on because I don't want to just read this talk here. He says, in short, we have a life of devoted discipleship to give in demonstrating our love of the Lord. We can't quit and we can't go back. After an encounter with the living Son of the living God, nothing is ever again to be as it was before. There's a couple of issues that I have in here, and you're squinting at me like you have some issues too.
No, I'm squinting because I'm thinking. I'm kind of going, okay, I'm not sure where Mason's going with this. So this is my thinking face.
All right, good.
My thinking face looks like squints.
Well,
your thinking face looks angry.
It's rare that I get a thinking face from you. I usually get an I'm ready to talk face.
Okay.
So this is good.
I'll squint more often.
So we can't quit and we can't go back. I think that it is a false message. We can quit, we can go back, and oftentimes in our lives we will do both. And it leads, this idea leads me, it's almost a shaming thing that if you do quit, you're off the path. You're not on track anymore. And it doesn't leave much room for repentance. It doesn't leave much room for weakness. It doesn't leave much room for life.
For humanity.
For humanity, yeah, that's a better word. Life. That's what I meant by life. It doesn't leave much room for that when he says you cannot quit. Well, I just don't agree with that. And then the really big piece here, after an encounter with the living Son of the living God, nothing is ever again to be as it was before. Now, what do you mean by encounter?
Yeah.
What do you mean by never the way it was before? Mm-hmm. I feel the implied message is that if you have a testimony, you've had that encounter, and your life is never the same again. And I just don't feel like that's an adequate, an appropriate way to again, demonstrate humanity. Like, I feel in the past, I've had a very strong testimony of the reality of Jesus Christ. There's been times in my life where I've questioned that. There's some serious times going on right now where people close to me are questioning that.
Right.
And I'm seeing other things that make me want to question that. And I don't like that in my life.
You don't like the questioning?
I don't like the fact that things that I felt were rock solid in my life there's the potential that they do not exist in the sphere that I thought that they did.
Right, which is always terrifying.
It's I don't like it at all.
Right. It's supposed to feel uncomfortable and yucky, and right, because there's these warning signals of if you make a shift, life is going to be really, really hard.
Right.
And
we can't quit. We can't quit.
Yeah. Well, and so I think one of the reasons what I'm hearing you say, and one of the things that I recognized is we were kind of almost kicking off kind of a planning meeting, because you were kind of checking in with, hey, Sarah, is this what we're looking for? Does this fit that buck? And sort of, yeah, it does. I think that one of the reasons why you're having a hard time finding an answer is because you're still struggling to understand what is meant by an external source versus an internal source.
I need to learn that from you just as much as every one of our listeners does.
Alrighty,
and I just kind of figured that would come in the podcast.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and we can definitely do that. But one of the things is that this is kind of that, like you said, that subliminal message. And could it be external messaging? Maybe it's not as direct as what I was going for that podcast. But I think that what you're touching on is that emotional manipulation and the idea of there's this stated expectation, and it's worded in such a way that disagreement or another opinion is shut down before it's allowed to take root.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I cannot remember the stinking clinical name for that dynamic. So that thingy for now, because this...
That was very professional. I better write that one down.
Right.
That thingy.
I'm going to use that, and the thingamajig and the doohickey and the what's it called. And yeah, I've got all kinds of words.
Whatchamacallit.
Right. Yep, that's me. But one of the things that really stands out to me is that this is a pretty common way that we as Mormons go about communicating. Is this is the idea, and because I know I'm right, and because I'm not open to another perspective, and because there really isn't an allowance for growth or learning outside of our box, I used to for sure. I probably still do. I don't notice it as much, but I do still catch myself. And I notice you doing it. You were actually doing it this morning when you were talking to your brother on the phone and kind of working him through some things. And I'll give you an example of it. But it's like I'm making this statement, but I'm not leaving room for disagreement. And I wish I could remember that word that I'm looking for. So, hey, if there's anybody else clinical out there, please define this, because I am drawing a blank. But in the sense, like when you were talking to your brother, you were saying things as fact and then saying right to him, but there wasn't a lot of allowance for him to be like, no, I don't agree with that, because then that throws off the point that you're trying to make. And you're right, it is a mind trick in the sense of once you have this, you can't, because that message of what he's not saying is, and if you do, there's something wrong with you. Right. And so it sets us up for receiving that as a message of shame. And that's because the statement is basically he's taking a statement, making it fact, even though there's no way to have tangible evidence to place it as fact. And so when we get
and then manipulating my behavior because of the fact that he just created.
Right. He says, this is the fact, and now you need to behave because this is the fact and how I'm seeing it. Yeah.
Right.
And then you talked about something that you had said earlier before we started recording that really got me. So you're like, and then he gets all emotional. And I think that emotion is manipulative. And I mean, again, whether or not he's doing it intentionally,
I'm not here to judge his intentionality.
One of the things that I do in clinic is, reality-based thinking, or something that we call Socratic questioning, where we start to poke holes in somebody's perceived reality because the reality is based on non-tangible, non-concrete fact. So, for example, if you don't obey all of these rules and do all of these things, you can't live with your family again forever in heaven. Now, number one, I don't think there's anything that shows up like that in the scriptures that they use as part of their correlated study. But it's been said over and over and over again. So it's this fear tactic, but it sounds really pretty on the outside. If you do all the right things and you check all these boxes, then you get to live with your family in heaven again. Well, the thing is that give me something concrete. What evidence do you have to demonstrate that is a statement of fact? And the answer is nothing other than the words of people claiming to be prophets. What fact do you have? What's tangible that you have that Joseph Smith saw God and Jesus in the Sacred Grove or the forest in Palmyra, New York? We don't, other than the things that he said and the recordings that we have from him, but it's all conjecture. Now, does that mean it's not true? No.
No, of course
But it
not.
also doesn't mean that it is true. And so when we end up basing our entire belief system off of the feelings that we have and the statements of people where there's no evidence to ground us into reality-based thinking, we run the risk of this like living outside of reality. Now, I know that I'm not saying that Mormons do that. Some Mormons absolutely do, and it gets them in trouble.
Lots of people do.
For example, like the Lafferty brothers. Mason, something that you and I talked about when we watched the Under the Banner of Heaven series. Was that on Netflix? Or was it on Hulu? I don't even remember where we ended up watching
I thought it was on HBO, but I don't remember. Anyway, Under the Banner of Heaven,
we'll
it was
get
terrific.
We'll put that in the show notes and whatnot so you can find it if you're still looking for it. But we watched that, and then one of the things that we commented on was how a lot of Mormons were really angry and saying this does not represent the Mormon church. And you and I looked at that and we were like, well, duh. Because it's not a representation of the Mormon church. It's a representation of how the Lafferty brothers perceived the teachings of the Mormon church.
Right.
And that perception, the way that they were doing things was completely based on the teachings that were in some pamphlet and some of the things that had been said by Joseph Smith and Brigham Young a million years ago that were taken, I'm going to say really literally. And they kind of, in a sense, they lost their moral compass, and they definitely lost their humanity because they were no longer in touch with reality. And when I say that, I don't mean like schizophrenic, paranoid, hallucinating, out of touch with reality, but rather they were disconnected with the world around them. And I think one of the concerns that I have with members of the church is because they do tend to live in these isolated communities, and they don't like to let anything non-Mormon in because it's all perceived as a threat. There's a huge risk for living in this alternate reality that isn't founded in evidentiary fact or tangible things. It's all based on feelings and experiences, but I'm interpreting my experiences through the lens that the church has given me. And so when we come back to statements like what you're talking about here, that the crowning characteristic of love, as defined by Jeffrey R. Holland, is loyalty. If we step away from that and we then look at, okay, what is our linguistic and our anthropological and our relational and these other pieces, what is that definition of love? And I think you're going to come up with two very different and distinct definitions. But one of the things that cults like to do, and something that, is it Luna Lindsay Cobden? I think that's her name. I need to double check that. In her book, Recovering Agency, one of the things that she talks about, and one of the things that Steve Hassens has talked about in that cult research, is that they change the terminology of certain things so that they say something, but they've shifted the meaning of the word to mean something else in order to bring their point home. And that is a manipulation tactic, because loyalty might definitely, when you love somebody, you might be loyal to them. But I would not say that the definition of love or the crowning characteristic of love is loyalty and therefore then obedience. I just don't see that. And so there's kind of some play on words here that he's taking advantage of.
It almost feels like black and white thinking again, right? That I'm going to impose this definition or this comparison and at the same time impose a punishment almost if you don't see it that same way. Well, it's been hard. I think that's part of the hardness of it, is this, that there's so much black and white, right? Either you see it my way or you're
wrong.
You're wrong, yeah, and that's difficult.
Well, and that's a totalist. What is the word I'm looking for, Mason? Thinking. The all or nothing thinking.
Totalitarian? I don't know.
That's not the word I was looking for, but that works. I'm having a hard time finding my...
All or nothing kind of
stuff. Yeah,
it's
the all or nothing thinking, that if you're not with me, you're against me.
Right.
And that's difficult. But the terminology that I was struggling to find earlier is it's called loading the language, where you get really passionate and you explain things, but you shift the meaning of the term just enough to give it new meaning so that it sends a different message. It's a characteristic of a cult, and Luna Lindsay Cobden talks about it. I actually pulled her book out. I'm sorry, I pulled their book out. I apologize, Lindsay, for using the wrong pronoun there. So I pulled Lindsay's book out, and on page 80 of Recovering Agency, Lifting the Veil of Mormon Mind Control, they define loading the language as existing words are loaded with new meaning. So in this case, love now has a different meaning or a different characteristic. New words are added, other words are banned or dropped from usage. This affects ability to think as well as ability to communicate comfortably with those outside the group. And so one of the concerns that Lindsay talks about quite a bit in their book is that when we define things different than the rest of the world, it places a barrier on our ability to connect with and communicate with that world. And then when you add this heartfelt, one of the challenges here with Elder Holland is that he's in a position of power. He's speaking on behalf of the church. And so if he's getting emotional about something, it lends us to feel like
This is important.
it's more important, right? That there's more significance here, especially in a church where emotion isn't necessarily something that we are super comfortable with.
Right. Yeah. So I think part of the issue for me here is that, and maybe this is the case for a lot of people out there, is that if you want to define your love for God as loyalty, I don't necessarily see an issue with that. Like, I love God. I'm going to be completely loyal to him because I want to, because I have that relationship with him. Mm-hmm. I feel like he's on my side. I feel like I'm doing the best that I can and all of those things. And that defines your love as loyalty to him. I don't have an issue with that. I really don't. But if you're going to, as a leader in any organization, any church, basically tell me that I have to be loyal or I'm not loving God, I have a problem with that. Because my love for God may be defined a little differently than yours or his or anybody else's. Mm-hmm. And what if I'm a recovering drug addict where I was lost in that mess, or that's not really the
yeah,
I'll go back to
I'm kind of wondering, I'd actually challenge you, Mason, bring this back inward.
Well,
instead of taking it if you are, let's make this personal for you. So my question is, when you listened to or read this talk, you listened to it because you heard the emotional side of that, and it rubbed you the wrong way. What was going on for you inside? What feeling? What was that?
I think it was because I'd had a dirty shirt on and I hadn't showered for a day or so.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Deflection, distraction. So
Let's
it
see,
personal.
what rubbed me the wrong way?
What feeling did it create? Like, let's use the RAID system. What feeling did it create in you?
Yeah, I don't do feelings very well.
Do you need the feelings board right here?
No, it's not going to help. Like, I love the idea of feeling your feelings and recognizing where they are in your body, and I've never been able to do that. And so this is not going to be the time where I suddenly figure it out.
Wait.
So,
you're not going to learn a new skill while on the spot recording for a podcast. That's so unreasonable.
Right.
So
and it's not that I'm unwilling. I just recognize this isn't the place where that's going to happen.
So then what about that rubbed you the wrong way? Where were what was going on for you the first time you felt that ick and that break or that flag or that amygdala? I don't like this. Something about this bothers me and I don't know what it is.
I think that it's the enclosure. And what I mean by that's the first word that came to mind. What I mean by that is, instead of loving God becoming this liberating experience in my life where, because I have a great love for God, I'm going to adjust my behavior. I'm going to adjust what I want out of life. I'm going to be kinder. I'm going to be more generous because I'm feeling that as what God is. Like, I now have this connection with God, and that's the characteristics that I see from him. The experiences in my life are that God is generous, and so now I'm going to be generous as well. Instead of getting that feeling from this talk, I get instead the obligation that I have to see God in that light. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to love him, I have to keep his commandments. That I have to be loyal to him in spite of anything else that might happen in my life, in spite of other questions. Now, I want to be loyal to God.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to slow you down as if you were...
I'm already talking slow.
...my client. Well, no, I'm going to slow you down a little bit. I want to dig into what you just said a little bit more.
I just want you to know that I'm getting therapized again. This is like the first episode, so we'll see how this goes.
Are you comfortable with this?
Well, it doesn't have to go on the air. So I guess if you're listening to this, you'll know I was comfortable.
Informed consent by listener
Anyway, drive on.
exposure.
Slow me down. Ask me questions.
Yeah. So I heard you use the word. Oh, shoot. I just forgot. In caps. Enclosed. That's the word that you said. You used the word enclosed. When you said that, I hear the word trapped. Would you say that you felt trapped?
I don't know if I did feel trapped, but I can feel perhaps the reality of being trapped. I think part of maybe why I'm struggling with this a little bit is because I don't really know where I stand right now, but that feels trapping.
Okay. Or limiting.
Or maybe limiting. I think trapped is a more appropriate word.
Right, and we're talking about, well, I'm going to say almost like a behavioral trap in this way. Like love is usually something we experience. And because of that experience, there are certain hormones.
You know what?
Go ahead.
You know what I think I felt most, and this is kind of what I've been aiming for in going through this podcast. I felt empathetic. I felt empathetic towards the people who have heard those kinds of things and felt trapped.
Okay.
It's not so much that I feel trapped because I don't really know where I am, and my perspective is far more vast than it used to be. I don't feel trapped. If today I decided I need to walk away from this church, I think that I could. There would be some difficult aspects to it, but I think I could do it. Mm-hmm. So I don't feel trapped, but I felt incredibly empathetic towards those who do feel trapped by that kind of dogma, that kind of idea that the cart is in front of the horse kind of thing. Like I have to be loyal to God in order to prove my love, instead of, because I have the relationship that I have with God, I am loyal because I want to be.
Right.
And it may be semantics, but for me, it feels like a vastly different thing. Mm-hmm. It would kind of be like, in the olden days when you got arranged marriages and, people came together and a lot of them worked really, really well because they came together. This husband and wife decided, we're going to make this work. We're going to be a good relationship. We're going to fall in love, blah, blah, blah. The relationship works out really well because they decide that that's what they want from it. Mm-hmm. And other relationships, I'm certain, did work out very well because they didn't have that mindset. For me, it almost feels like I'm being forced into this situation and then I have to decide what I'm going to do with it.
Right. It's almost like if you love in a way that doesn't look loyal, you're loving wrong.
Yeah, to some degree, absolutely.
So then what does love look like for you?
The funny thing is, one of the first words that came to mind is loyalty.
Okay.
Because, like I said, I don't have a problem with the idea of love and loyalty being connected. I have a problem with the idea that I'm being forced into the loyalty or that other people are being forced into the loyalty. Because you see God as this way, I have to see God as this way, and I have to be loyal to that concept of who he is. So love for me is giving of yourself.
Okay.
Maybe wholly and completely to another person, but not to the point that you lose who you are. It is being able to see past faults in order to create a relationship that is not affected by those faults. Mm-hmm. It is being loyal to that person until they demonstrate that loyalty is not appreciated. It is trust until that person demonstrates that trust is not, they're not
Well,
worthy of that trust anymore.
Yeah, you're describing the characteristics of love, but not what love is. Which is kind of what Holland did as well. The crowning characteristic is loyalty. You know, when I look up, okay, so what is love? Love for me on here is an intense feeling of deep affection, a great interest and pleasure in something. That's the noun. And then as the verb, feel deep affection for someone, or to like or enjoy something very much. And so for me, the crowning characteristic of love when I'm speaking about human connection or loving others, or that spiritual love, for me, the crowning characteristic would be connection. It would be belonging. I might be sounding a little bit like Brene Brown right now. I would say that the characteristics are serving, hugging, intimate touch. And so if that's with a child, it's going to be holding hands and hugs and snuggles while I read you stories. It's about, for me, love is about helping other people know that they are valued and expressing care for them. I think in my work, I see a lot of people who are the victims of affairs. And so when we talk about loyalty with regards to love, I think it's pretty common for people to jump to, if you loved me, you would be loyal within the relationship, as in sexually loyal. And what I can speak of from both personal and then my experiences in clinic is that the majority of people who have affairs love their family, and that there's some unresolved wound that is getting in the way of remaining loyal, but that lack of loyalty does not define the love that the cheating partner has for their spouse, which is one of the reasons why betrayal, trauma, and treating affairs can be so challenging, because usually what I see is a depth of love for each other and this huge emotional wound that really complicates functioning within the relationship. But almost never do I see partners cheating on each other and then coming in for counseling to fix it. Usually when that happens, the love piece has changed and then the affair happens. Not the people that are coming in to me that I see in clinic who share deep love and they're searching for healing. I think that the crowning characteristic of love is providing an environment of safety where humans can connect, belong, and feel emotionally safe. For me.
Said yeah simply because I'm still here. I'm just thinking kind of through.
Yeah.
I did look up Brene Brown's definition because I've always liked
right.
it.
Brene has been a huge. I would say Brene Brown for you is really your first catalyst into being in touch with your emotional self, and that's been such a wonderful thing to watch and be a part of with you.
Well, it's been a good journey, and obviously I'm left kind of blank trying to describe and define some things in my life, and that hurts sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't matter very much. Love is connection. Love is, but but deep connection. So let me just read this because this means a lot to me.
Is this from?
This is from Brene Brown.
Brene Brown. And what's your source before you do that so that our listeners can find it?
This is all from The Power of Vulnerability.
Okay.
I'm finding it actually online at this moment because I didn't write it down on my notes, but I have that. So she says, we cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that, offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Love is not something we give or get. It is something that we nurture and grow, a connection that can only be cultivated between two people when it exists within each of them. We can only love others as much as we love ourselves.
Oh, I love that. That is one of my favorite concepts that came from Brene Brown. Can you read that last line again and a little bit slower?
We can only love others as much as we love ourselves.
Absolutely. I agree with that statement.
Yeah, I've heard 100%. Lots of people kind of argue it a little bit, and that's fine. But I think that, mostly they argue that like in a parental situation, like, well, I can love my kids more than I love myself. And maybe that's true. I understand the argument, but I do agree with this. I agree that you cannot, even your children, you can't love them more than you love yourself.
I agree.
And then the last piece here isn't as much about love as much as it is, this is what we avoid to keep love. Shame, blame, disrespect, betrayal, and the withholding of affection damages the roots from which love grows. Love can only survive these injuries if they are acknowledged, healed, and rare. And I think the reason that I wanted to pull that out is the acknowledgement piece. Like here, when we talk about all this religious trauma, mostly it's because it's unacknowledged. Like Mormons in general want to just pretend it's not there. I reached out because we're going live tomorrow, which of course you guys won't hear this, but where we're giving this, for us, it goes live tomorrow.
Our time and space is Sunday.
Right, our time and space
September
is different than
4th
yours.
In the early evening.
We go live
in
tomorrow.
Missouri.
So I sent out a message to all my family members who are still, for the most part, active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's something along the lines of, the podcast is coming out. I would love if you would listen and support us.
I didn't realize you had sent the message. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, cool.
But I also respect that if you can't be in that place, don't do it. Some of the stuff we're going to talk about is going to be triggering, and I want you to be in a healthy place. And so one of my sisters reached out and was somewhat antagonistic about it, and not unsurprised by that. And I
know what sister.
Right, you do, and that's fine, right? And I completely respect that.
I'm guessing which sister, because I didn't even realize you had sent that out.
Right.
But as soon as you say was somewhat antagonistic, I'm like,
right, who it was.
I know which one that is. Yeah.
And this is not to berate her at all.
No, not at all. She's in a completely different space.
I completely respect her desire to stay happy and peaceful in where she is. I completely respect that.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to damage that in any way.
Well,
if you're not ready to listen to this kind of stuff, then don't listen to this kind of stuff.
Well, and I think what's really hard when it comes to your family, and the reason I bring this up is because I know that we're not alone in this, is that we can say those words, and you and I both know that we mean that we are genuine in our statement of, if it's not a good place for you to listen to this, then don't, and we're not, our feelings aren't going to be hurt, and we really want you to do what's best for you. Like, we invite you to listen, but hey, if it's not for you, cool. But I wanted to come to you and say, this is what I'm doing. I'm really proud of this, and I would love to invite you along in our journey.
Right.
And the challenge is that I don't feel like your family has the skills or the experience to understand that we are genuine in that we truly mean that, and that's a happy, healthy place to be, that you can be in a different place or have different beliefs and still have a really healthy friendship and relationship. And instead, it's like the more you question some of the things that you've been taught growing up, and reasonably so, the more dangerous your family views you, or the more, Sarah's had a bad influence on Mason. I love that I'm the one that gets blamed for this, but
you know,
Mason,
apostate.
I am the apostate, damn it. But that you're being viewed as broken, flawed, dangerous, harmful. I'm noticing that my nieces and nephews are no longer on my Facebook page, and which is kind of funny because I created a separate Facebook account for this stuff so that my Facebook account is now, my personal Facebook account is now mostly pictures of my kids and just the normal family stuff. And so I kind of separated that on purpose.
It does hurt that it doesn't feel like there's much attempt to understand where I am. Like, I got to stay away from you. You're leprous, right? I can't be close to you because I'll get infected as well.
It's painful.
And maybe you will get infected as well. If you look at why people are leaving these kind of high demand religions, it's because they get exposed to something that bursts the bubble that they're living in.
Yeah. And
that's painful, and maybe it's not better for them. I don't know, but I think that the vast majority of people feel like it's better for them. So it hurts a little bit. But anyway, I brought that up because she was a little bit antagonistic, but even accused me of, this is Jesus Christ's church and you're attacking it, and that's not okay.
Huh. And has she listened to any of the shorts?
No, of course not. No.
Did you ask her if she'd listened to any of them?
We had a little bit of a conversation, and I wasn't at the end. Basically, what I said was, I respect that feeling, and I honor your ability to have it, and that was it. I ended the conversation. She hasn't responded, because I really do. The comments that she made do not demonstrate that she's in a place to have a conversation about this.
Which is hard. You got to read, like what we talked about
with
Hayden the other. You got to read the room. She's not in a place
and
to
I
hear.
haven't always been able to do that. Sometimes I would have pressed it, and even now in the future, there'll probably be times where I press it too, but I'm trying not to. I'm trying to recognize that she's scared. In this case, she's scared for my eternal salvation. I respect that. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I respect it, and I can love her even with that, because that doesn't change the way I feel about her, because I'm trying to understand where she's coming from.
Well, it's really interesting that you say that, because you're talking about this, what is love, and Holland defines the defining characteristic, or the crowning characteristic, is loyalty. And then you're having this experience right now unfolding for you with your family, and that loyalty thing doesn't feel like they're being loyal to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or the Mormon Church, and you're not being loved.
Yeah. Well, and if the crowning thing about love is loyalty, he's talking about loyalty to God. He's talking about loyalty to Jesus Christ. He doesn't actually mention, I think, loyalty to the church, although it's very well implied. But I'm not being unloyal to God, I think. I am questioning a lot of things, and I'm trying to acknowledge the icky stuff so that we can then process it, because we can't process it like somebody that comes to you, they may come to you as a client and say, I need some help with my past. And you say, okay, well, what is it you're worried about? And they're like, I can't tell you. Like, well, then
That's
you're not
happened.
Right. You're not going to be able to get very far. And maybe it's because they can't tell you all the details.
That happens a lot.
But if they can't tell you at all, they're not going to get very far. Eventually, you're able to get them to the point where they're comfortable talking about it. That's how it has to be.
Well, and I want to put a plug in here. It's really healthy for clients to come in and be like, well, I'm going to need help with this, but I'm not quite ready to talk about this with you because I don't know you yet.
Right.
And I still need to read the room and make sure that I feel safe with you. And so it's not uncommon for it to take people a little bit of time to really open up. And that's normal and that's healthy. But you're right. We can't change what we don't talk about.
Yes, and that's all we want. Like, this isn't the podcast to break your shelf or to pull you out of the bubble. This isn't really what we're about. If you want to do that, there's some other podcasts that probably will do that better for you. This is, like we said in the very beginning, this is about you're in a situation, you're like, where do I go from here? Right. This is about helping to find those tools to get us there.
I think it's important to define what confirmation bias is at this point. because one of the challenges, in the post-Mormon podcasting world, holy cow, say that 10 times fast. But in the post-Mormon podcasting world, they throw around the word confirmation bias all the time. And so I pulled out my book, The Socratic Method of Psychotherapy. It's written by James Overholser. And the Socratic, I love to utilize Socratic questioning to help people get back into a reality-based thinking space and to kind of challenge, I use this a lot for people who are struggling with heightened anxiety or a little bit of paranoia, not full-blown schizophrenic paranoia, and whatnot. But one of the things that they say is in here is many people display a confirmation bias defined as the tendency to notice, accept, seek, and remember information that supports, I got to turn the page, that supports their pre-existing beliefs while largely ignoring, disregarding, or belittling information that might challenge or refute their views. And so again, this is in the book, The Socratic Method of Psychotherapy by James Overholser. And this quote starts at the very bottom of page 91 and ends at the very top of page 92. And then this book was published, let's see, when was the last time? This was copyright 2018 Columbia University Press. So I want to make sure that I give that the credit for where that's due. But I think one of the challenge is within Mormonism is that confirmation bias in the sense that in this case with Elder Holland's talk, the crowning characteristic of love as defined by an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ who most likely speaks with
holds a little
Jesus
bit of weight for members of the
is
church.
saying that this is what that means, therefore insert confirmation bias.
Yeah.
That's what it means.
Yeah.
Your
there won't be investigation about it. It's like,
right.
I never thought of it that way. Okay, cool. Now I know. Right.
Right. Instead of approaching it from a place of curiosity and kind of
Yeah.
thinking, okay, does this have meaning for me or what can I do with this information?
Right. Does this help me? Does this hurt me?
Right.
Yeah.
And so we do have that. The other thing I wanted to read out of here, again, same book, and now I'm on page 89, is that it says so at the very bottom of page 89, beliefs and opinions are fallible. Most knowledge is actually mere belief or opinion. Many ideas we hold are not based on actual knowledge or first-hand experience. Opinions, hang on, let me make sure I'm reading this correctly. I turned
First-hand experience. Yeah.
Or first-hand experience. Opinions are preferences that may or may not be true. And so when we look at this, what we've got going on with your sister is there's the opinion that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the only true and living church, that it is actually Jesus Christ's church.
Right.
But all of the evidence to that is based on feelings and emotions and what we're going to talk about, this external source saying this is what's true, and not on critical thinking skills and those types of things. And I know that's difficult. In any religious dogma, you're going to have that existential experience. That's part of what's going on. But the challenge is then you have that confirmation bias in the church. Your sister, your family, my family, that we've been taught since we were little that anything that goes against the narrative of the church is anti and dangerous and apostate behavior and all of these other things. And that's a confirmation bias. I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. I'm not going to consider where maybe my opinion is wrong or my knowledge isn't actually knowledge. Like, I know that ice feels cold because I've held ice. Although if from the time I was little I had held ice and somebody told me that felt hot, then I would hold ice and I would think it felt hot. Right. Those are just the labels we use to define it. But I know
and it would be true to you.
And it would be true. Well, and if everybody, like if the whole world defined the color of the sky as being purple, well, then the color of the sky would be purple, and we would just change the label. So even our language can be very subjective, and that's a whole other, deep conversation. Sure. But when it comes to that confirmation bias, it's I can't bring in any contradictory information because it's going to challenge my pre-existing belief pattern. And when other information comes in, I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to disregard it. I like here that, again, on page 92, he says belittling that information, which we see that a lot, that, oh, I can't even believe you think that. That's so stupid. This is, so they kind of start to name call the information.
Right, now you're attacking my character instead of the information.
Right.
And that is a thought-stopping thing, right?
Right. Well, and there's a lot of crossover here. So I think, Mason, the reason I wanted to jump on and record this and get this down for the record is that you were in the moment having an experience where something was said by somebody that you, at least until recently, and maybe even today, would consider an apostle of God, said something and then had an emotional response, which almost felt a little manufactured, like a manufactured emotional response, in order to drive home a point that didn't feel genuine or authentic to you, and led to a feeling of empathy for others who might be experiencing that same, whoa, that does not fit my truth. And when we talk about my truth, we're talking about, experiential truth, subjective truth, not factual truth here. And that you really wanted to voice that. And I really wanted to get it on here because that's something that we want to model, is the ability to discover and kind of work through how some of this new information can really impact you. So I really appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and to let me kind of sit a little bit in the counselor role. And again, this is for educational purposes only.
Right. Everybody else's experience is going to be different. And I'm thinking at the end of this journey for me, I'm either going to be a active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who now knows all the icky sticky stuff and is aware and can watch for those kind of things and protect myself from them, protect my family from them, not by hiding them, but just by being aware of them. Or I'm not going to be a member of the church because I can't handle all the icky, and I can't handle the way that people respond about the icky, and I have not made that decision. Right. And I'm perfectly content at the moment to walk through that process, although it sucks and it hurts.
Well, and you and I had talked about, and something I don't know if your family brought this up, but it wouldn't surprise me if it does come up soon, is what if the church excommunicates you for sharing your opinions and your experiences? And I know that the other day you said, yeah, we should probably talk about that on our podcast. So what are your thoughts about that?
Did we say we should probably talk about that on the podcast?
We did, and we both just said, should. We need to put, a quarter in the should jar.
I blocked it out.
You blocked it out. So did you want to talk about that, or do you want me to skip over that?
I think my response to that question was, I don't want that to happen, but I guess if it does, then they've made the choice for me.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm going to come back to this, I think this will be the third time that we've addressed it in the last couple of podcasts, that the church and high demand religions in general do not want to be called into question.
Right.
They do not want to be criticized. They do not want to be asked hard questions. They do not want to appear as if they don't have the answers.
Right. Oh, that's Mason's alarm. It is time for our boys or girls today.
Both. It's Sunday. Yeah.
Oh, it's Sunday. Sunday evening. The kids all get showers.
So they don't.
And yes, we set an alarm in order to remember to get them through the shower before bedtime. Right? So. Not 12. Not 12. Okay, so keep going.
They don't want to be criticized. And frankly, an organization, I think I've said this once before, it's something I feel very strongly, an organization that does not accept criticism will eventually fall apart, because there's no perfect organization out there. And they can say that their criticism, quote unquote, comes from God when he offers revelation, but I don't see that as criticism. I see that if this is what's going on, if God is actually communicating with them, I see that as God saying, hey, this needs to change. It's not a criticism. But if you cannot take criticism from the people on
That the
front line,
organization is
so
affecting.
I'm going to go from the Army here. If the general or colonel at the back of the formation cannot accept the report from the people at the front of the formation, something bad's going to happen.
Right.
They got to be able to call back and say,
I love that
this is where
analogy.
we are. I need artillery right here. And the general can't go, wait a second, that's not right. I'm not sending artillery there. Well, somebody's going to get killed.
Right.
And they have to be able to accept the report from the front lines. Doesn't mean those reports won't be wrong sometimes, but they have to
Right.
get the information from the
They
front
have
lines.
to consider the information that is being presented to them from the people who are experiencing it in
Right.
the trenches.
And they may
Absolutely.
go in that situation, and this will happen with other organizations. They may go, crap, I can't do anything about that.
Right.
And that happens in wars. Sometimes people will get killed because the people in the back can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And maybe that happens in churches and religious organizations as well. But it feels like they're not accepting the reports.
You know, I think, yeah, I agree with you. And they're not taking accountability for when they make mistakes. You know, sometimes, like you said, not sometimes, there is loss in war. And oftentimes it's unavoidable loss. And oftentimes it's from mistakes. And,
Yes.
you know, then the Army has its problems.
Sure.
But I also
Desert
think
Storm,
that-
we lost more people to friendly fire than we did anything else.
Yeah, which is
And
just
so
devastating.
Mistakes happen, right?
Yeah,
And
which is so devastating. And
absolutely.
And sometimes there's perspectives, but I think I'm going to extend your analogy, Mason, even to humans, to us as individuals. If we as individuals are not open to constructive criticism,
Yeah.
if we as humans are not able to take accountability for where we've messed up, even when that mess up wasn't necessarily our direct doing. You know, sometimes
Yeah.
I might be irritable and grumpy at the kids, and I'm irritable and grumpy, and it doesn't have anything to do with the kids at all, and yet I still take it out on them. I still have an obligation to heal that emotional wound if I want to continue to have a connection and
Yeah.
build a relationship with those individuals in my life. And so,
I've apologized for all kinds of things I never did.
okay, have you apologized for the things you have done? Because that's
Yes.
key.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not that it was a false apology. It was, look, I probably had a hand in
Yeah.
this too. And it helps to calm the situation down rather than saying, I never did that. All that
Right.
does is ramp the situation up.
Yeah. So I'm going to leave a call to action to our listeners today, and that is examine your lives and check in with yourself. How are you as an individual doing with taking constructive criticism? Constructive criticism comes from a place of love. Sometimes it's not said in the best manner. Okay, let's give
And
our
it's-
speaker
and
of
it's
criticism.
rarely easy.
Right. Almost never is it easy. And our speakers of that criticism aren't often equipped with the tools to give it in a constructive manner. So I would say definitely look at the intent of that. That will help the acceptance of it better. But is there something you can learn from that? And if there is, take it. Learn, grow, become a better person, become your true authentic self. For me, Sarah Westbrook, I'm a much happier individual outside of the Mormon church than I ever was inside of the Mormon church. And I know that that is not going to be true for everybody. I know that some people are happier inside than outside, even when they know all the icky.
Yeah.
So again, Mason, I'm going to echo what you said earlier. Our goal isn't to necessarily change your mind, but rather teach you some skills so that you can learn what to do with all the information that's out there. Learn how have I been hurt? Recognize that, give that space, and learn how to grow and become somebody new with that. So our
make
call
it
to
personal.
action is take
Examine
some time,
yourself. Yeah.
examine
Let's do
yourself.
some self-actualization.
And then, grow and become. And keep an eye out for that confirmation bias, because even on the outside of the church in this ex-Mormon community, you're going to hear something and you're going to jump right on board with that, and it might not be true. And true based on physical, tangible, concrete evidence. And so we have to be willing to shift on both sides. So yeah, let's learn, grow, and become better together. Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook. Produced by Alex Vidalis and Daisy Girl Communications. Music by Lorenzo Emanuel. It creates an environment of thought stopping. Is intentionality a word?
Yep.
Ugh, man, I think we fought about this one before too, so darn it. All right. Because I was wrong, I need a foot massage. And if you had been wrong, then I'd have gotten a back massage. So anyway, that look is terrible.